If you are a baby boomer, you already know the importance of Brian Wilson, the importance of the Beach Boys, the importance of Pet Sounds, possibly the greatest musical album ever made. He's up there with Bach, he's up there with Beethoven, maybe not as high as Tchaikovsky, but he is a genius, or rather was, until today when his family announced his passing at the age of 82. Rest in peace, genius Brian Wilson. Tulsi Gabbard did the world a favor today. Visiting Hiroshima, she was, I think, genuinely shaken to her core at the reminders that are still there in that Japanese city, in the shadows on the walls where once there were human beings, where the grandchildren of those who perished gave testimony. It chilled her blood. It chilled her to the bone. And she was not shy in telling us what once upon a time was a commonplace amongst people of my age. Everybody knew the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war. But she said an important thing. She said those who incite conflict between nuclear powers are enemies of humanity. She's predictably being denounced as a Putin apologist. Anyone who speaks common sense in this crazy world is denounced as a Putin apologist. But I remind you, she's the director of national intelligence in the White House to President Donald Trump. And of course, we know who these people are that are inciting conflict between nuclear-armed powers, superpowers even. And they are truly the enemies of humanity. Tulsi Gabbard was reminded of what happens with the devastation of a nuclear weapon 1,000 times less powerful than the nuclear weapons that are in profusion in the possession of a small number of countries today. 1,000 times more powerful are the thousands of nuclear weapons that would be unleashed in the event of a nuclear conflagration. Some of you seem to be lingering under the misapprehension that a war between two nuclear powers would remain conventional. But this is just about as stupid an idea as you have ever held. If one or the other of the nuclear-armed powers began to lose the conventional war, what do you think they're going to do? Hands up, hands over the keys to our nuclear arsenal, or are they going to escalate that conventional conflict first to battlefield nuclear weapons, then to intermediate-range nuclear weapons, that is to say France, Paris, London, etc., and then, if necessary, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are hypersonic in character, which cannot be shot down, which cannot be called back, and which would end life on the planet. 99% of the population, however deep was their nuclear bunker, in the affected countries would be destroyed. First by the blast. Luckily, if you're hit first by the blast. As Khrushchev famously said, in the event of a nuclear war, the living will envy the dead because of the sheer horror of the aftermath. The blast, followed by the nuclear fallout, the radiation, which would strike everyone with leukemia and other cancers almost instantly. And then the nuclear winter. The cloud of ash that would blot out the sun for decades, if not centuries, would lead to mass famine. 5 billion people in the world would die of famine in the aftermath of a nuclear war, even where their country was not itself struck, was not itself affected directly by the nuclear blast. 5 billion people would die of famine. Nothing would grow No heart would beat, no wings would beat, no plant, animal, or human being would remain alive in the event of a nuclear war. And yet, there are still those who are inciting nuclear powers to go to war with each other. Some of these inciters are yapping chihuahuas like the village states known as the Baltic republics, Lithuania, etc., constantly provoking their gigantic neighbor with all of its nuclear armory, calling for war, pushing, instigating, all the time inciting a nuclear confrontation between NATO and the Russian Federation. But countries like Germany, like France, like Britain, they are inciters also. Someone said to me the other day that I keep making the mistake of underestimating British military potential. I laughed, knowing as I do that the entire armed forces of my own country, Navy, Air Force, and Army, could comfortably fit in to a mid-table football stadium in England. They said, but we've got nuclear weapons. But of course, as soon as we fired our nuclear weapons, we'd be hit by 10, 20 nuclear weapons in response, and our country would be turned to ash. It would be an act of national suicide. And that makes you feel secure? That makes you feel brave, Starmer, Lammy, Healy? I know you don't know who Healy is. He's the great British war leader, an inky-fingered clerk who's never heard a gun fire in anger in his entire life. These inciters are trying to force President Donald Trump against his instincts to join the European powers in a war against Russia. And if they were to succeed, it is the end. Capital T, capital E. Tulsi Gabbard can see that. In possession of all the intelligence, metaphorically and literally. But these fools, these goons in London and Paris and Berlin, and whatever the capital cities of these little Baltic village states are, I can't be troubled to remember them. These people appear not to know what Tulsi Gabbard knows. The former leader, deputy foreign minister of the Ukraine told us this morning in the Daily Mail in England, the biggest selling national newspaper, and I quote, British mothers are going to have to accept that their sons may need to die for Finland. Finland? What's a Finland? Is it a store like Iceland? Is it something you eat, drive, or drink? You think my son's going to die for Finland? You have to be insane to believe that. At least I hope that's the answer of British mothers. We in the anti-war movement, no conscription league, no to NATO, no to war. We in the Workers' Party will work to do everything that we can to stop that from happening. But the public has to rise up and say, enough of this talk. We will not die for Finland, wherever it is, whatever it is. Finland had perfectly good and friendly relations with Russia since the end of the Second World War. Not during the Second World War, of course, because they were on the side of the Nazis. They were enforcing the siege on Leningrad that killed 1 million people who starved to death when there were no more rats and horses left to eat. That was Finland then. But since the end of the Second World War, they had perfectly good relations, normal relations with Russia. a stone's throw away from St. Petersburg, as it is now known. They were pushed to join NATO and immediately made themselves and are making themselves daily an enemy of Russia. And we're supposed to send our sons to die there for Finland? Pull the other leg. You have to be having a laugh. This has to be a joke, but alas, it is not a joke. Rutte, the runt of the Netherlands, kicked out by his own people, said this week, you have to double your money or take Russian lessons. You have to pay double on weapons and war what you're currently paying now, or learn Russian. 87% of the people in a poll I saw opted for the Russian language lessons. Double your money in countries that are going down the drain, in countries that are literally falling apart, where the public realm is worse than it was in the last century, where wages are the same as they were almost 20 years ago, where we can't afford schools, hospitals, universities, decent benefits for our poor old age pensioners. You want to double the money on weapons and war? Well, if you agree to that, you deserve everything that is coming to you. Mr. Rutte, of course, is employed in his little onesie to make these kind of constant, aggressive threats against Russia, even though he himself has never fired a gun in anger in his life either. These chicken hawks who've got a nuclear bunker to live out the nuclear winter, should it come. But you don't have a bunker. You will not live out World War III. And the conscripts won't even make it from Aldershot to Poland to join a front line that will very quickly cease to exist. They have provoked endlessly since the 1950s the Ukrainian people to be a knife in the back of the Russian Federation. In 2014, it reached its apogee when this war in Ukraine began. They tell you it started in 2022, but it started in 2014. They have tried everything to force the Ukrainian people, conscripts, swept off the streets by marauding bands of armed thugs working for Zelensky's recruiting sergeants, to force them as the cannon fodder. That's all they are, cannon fodder. Their life expectancy is sometimes measured in days, not even weeks, to try to weaken and divide the Russian Federation, and if possible to change its regime and the role that that regime plays in the world. The Ukrainians have paid a terrible price in blood. The rest of us have paid a terrible price in treasure, and we are committed for 100 years in Britain to going on paying that price. We'll be talking about all these things with our expert guests later in the show. Let me turn, if I may, my attention to a woman called Rima Hassan. If you don't know who she is, that's because the Western media are deliberately avoiding telling you who she is. She's a member of the European Parliament, a French member of the European Parliament. But tonight she's in solitary confinement in a dungeon in Israel, having been subjected, along with Greta Thunberg and others, Tiago Avila, and many others, who were kidnapped on the high seas in international waters, completely illegally, an act of piracy worthy of any Somali warlord pirate, by Israeli commandos, and taken under arms to the port of Ashdod in Israel, and thence to various dungeons. Some, like Greta, signed the papers for an immediate deportation to Paris, as it happened in Greta's case. But Rima is made of sterner stuff. She is a Palestinian. She was kidnapped on her way to her own country. She is a member of the European Parliament, and the European Parliament has done jack shit to get her out of that dungeon, where she's now on hunger strike. What is the point of a parliament that won't even do anything to release a member of their own parliament, a parliamentary colleague, from illegal incarceration in a dungeon in Israel, a country that the European Union bends over backwards, forwards again in triplicate to do everything that they can to make life easier for the apartheid state in Israel? What kind of France do we have where the president of France is not immediately on the phone to Netanyahu demanding the immediate release of his own citizen, an elected member of the European Parliament? Is this really France that we have today? Is Macron really the president? Is this the man that succeeded de Gaulle, General de Gaulle, to Emmanuel Macron? Do you think General de Gaulle would have tolerated such a thing? You think Mitterrand would have tolerated it? You think Chirac would have tolerated it? They'd have been out toot sweet pretty damn quick. But the French government is doing nothing to release their own member of the European Parliament. We'll be talking about all of these things and much more, including an interview with the delightful, exasperating, brilliant Elon Musk, the father of Elon Musk, coming up later in the show. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.